Vulnerable teams are strong teams. We often think strong teams are built by confidence, certainty, and control. We picture rooms full of people who have all the answers, never hesitate, and never admit doubt. But here's what years of real work with real people quietly teaches us: the strongest teams aren't the ones that pretend to be fearless. They're the ones brave enough to be human. Strength isn't found in perfection, it's found in trust. And trust begins the moment someone risks saying, "I don't know, I need help," or "I was wrong." Vulnerability is not the crack in the system. It's the doorway to connection, creativity, and resilience. Today, I want to talk about why vulnerable teams are not weak teams, why safety fuels performance, and how courage at work changes everything. 6 key points of the speech. 1, vulnerability is the foundation of trust. Trust doesn't grow from flawless performance. It grows from honest interaction. When team members feel safe admitting uncertainty or mistakes, they stop wasting energy on self-protection and start investing in collaboration. Vulnerability signals you belong here, even when you're imperfect. And belonging is the soil where trust grows. 2, psychological safety unlocks real performance. People don't do their best work when they're afraid of being judged. They do their best work when they feel safe enough to take risks, ask questions, and challenge ideas. Vulnerable teams create psychological safety, an environment where people are not punished for honesty. And when safety exists, innovation follows. 3, courageous leaders model the behavior they expect. Teams take their cues from leaders. When leaders admit mistakes, ask for feedback, and acknowledge their own learning edges, they give everyone else permission to do the same. Vulnerability is contagious, but only when it starts at the top. Courageous leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to learn in public. 4, shame is the silent killer of team culture. In many workplaces, shame hides in plain sight. It sounds like, don't mess up, don't look weak, don't ask questions. Shame shuts people down, disconnects them from each other, and destroys creativity. Vulnerable teams replace shame with curiosity, empathy, and accountability, and that shift changes everything. 5, honest conversations prevent future conflict. Avoidance feels easier in the moment, but it always costs more later. Vulnerable teams are willing to have hard conversations early with respect, clarity, and compassion. When people can speak truth without fear, resentment doesn't get a chance to grow. Conflict becomes a tool for alignment, not division. 6, vulnerability builds resilience in times of crisis, when challenges hit, and they always do. Teams that trust each other recover faster. Why? Because vulnerability has already built connection. People ask for help sooner. They support one another. They don't waste time blaming. They focus on solutions. Vulnerable teams don't just survive difficulty, they grow through it. Closing of the speech, the truth is vulnerability doesn't make teams fragile. It makes them flexible, adaptable, and strong. It replaces fear with trust and silence with connection. It turns individuals into teams and teams into communities. If we want stronger workplaces, we must choose courage over comfort. We must trade armor for openness and control for trust. Because when people feel safe to be seen, they show up fully, and that is where extraordinary work begins. Vulnerable teams are strong teams, not despite their humanity, but because of it. Thank you. Vulnerability is the foundation of trust. When we talk about trust inside teams, we often describe it as something abstract, something you either have or don't have. But trust isn't a personality trait, and it's not built through grand gestures or motivational speeches. Trust is built in moments of vulnerability. It grows quietly through small, everyday interactions where people choose honesty over self-protection. Most teams believe trust is earned by proving competence. We assume that if we appear confident, capable, and always in control, others will trust us. But here's the paradox. The more we armor up to look perfect, the harder it becomes for others to connect with us. Real trust doesn't come from seeing someone at their best. It comes from seeing how they handle uncertainty, mistakes, and learning. Vulnerability begins with the courage to say simple but powerful words. I don't know. I need help. I made a mistake, or I see this differently. These statements don't weaken trust. They strengthen it. They signal authenticity. They tell the team, I'm not here to perform. I'm here to participate. And when people sense that honesty is welcome, not punished, they begin to lower their own defenses. In teams where vulnerability is absent, energy is wasted on impression management. People focus more on how they are perceived than on the work itself. Questions go unasked. Ideas stay unspoken. Mistakes are hidden instead of addressed. Over time, this creates distance, resentment, and disengagement. The team may look functional on the surface, but underneath, trust is fragile. In contrast, vulnerable teams operate differently. When someone admits an error early, the team can fix it quickly. When someone asks for help, collaboration increases. When someone shares uncertainty, it invites collective problem solving. These moments send a clear message. This is a place where learning matters more than ego. Trust deepens because vulnerability humanizes people. It reminds us that behind every role or title is a person doing their best. And when we see each other as human, empathy replaces judgment. Accountability becomes about growth, not blame. Importantly, vulnerability does not mean oversharing or a lack of boundaries. It means sharing what is necessary to build clarity, connection, and trust. It's about being honest without being careless, open without being unprotected. Healthy vulnerability is intentional and grounded in respect. Over time, these small acts of courage compound. They create a culture where people don't have to guess whether it's safe to speak. They know it is. And in that environment, trust stops being fragile. It becomes resilient. Because trust doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with courage, and vulnerability is the courage that makes trust possible. Psychological safety unlocks real performance. We often assume that pressure drives performance, that people do their best work when expectations are high and mistakes are costly. But in reality, fear may create compliance, not excellence. Real performance doesn't come from walking on eggshells. It comes from knowing you can take risks without being humiliated or punished. This is where psychological safety becomes essential. Psychological safety is the shared belief that the team is a safe place to speak up, ask questions, challenge ideas, and admit mistakes. It does not mean lowering standards or avoiding accountability. In fact, it allows standards to rise because people are no longer afraid to engage fully. When team members feel safe, they contribute more, learn faster, and collaborate more effectively. In unsafe environments, silence becomes a survival strategy. People avoid speaking up because the cost feels too high. They nod in meetings while privately disagreeing. They keep ideas to themselves because they don't want to look foolish. They notice problems, but say nothing because pointing them out feels risky. Over time, this silence erodes performance far more than any single mistake ever could. Psychological safety changes that dynamic. In safe teams, curiosity replaces fear. Questions are welcomed instead of dismissed. Feedback becomes a tool for improvement rather than a weapon. People are willing to experiment because failure is treated as data, not as a personal flaw. This openness fuels innovation because new ideas are born from exploration, not certainty. One of the most powerful outcomes of psychological safety is faster learning. When people aren't hiding errors, teams can correct course quickly. Problems are addressed early instead of escalating quietly. This creates momentum. Teams become more agile because they are constantly adjusting, improving, and refining their approach together. It's important to clarify what psychological safety is not. It's not about being nice all the time. It's not about avoiding difficult conversations or lowering expectations. In fact, the safest teams often have the hardest conversations because honesty is respected. Psychological safety allows people to challenge ideas without attacking individuals. It separates the work from the worth of the person doing it. Leaders play a crucial role in shaping this environment. When leaders respond to questions with curiosity instead of defensiveness, safety grows. When they thank people for speaking up, especially when the message is uncomfortable, trust deepens. Every reaction sends a signal. People are always watching to see whether honesty is truly welcome. When psychological safety is present, performance shifts from individual survival to collective success. People stop asking, will this make me look bad? And start asking, will this make the work better? That shift is transformational because people don't perform best when they're protected by silence. They perform best when they're protected by trust. Courageous leaders model the behavior they expect. Culture is not created by mission statements or posters on the wall. It is created by behavior, especially the behavior of leaders. Teams do not become vulnerable because they are told to. They become vulnerable because they see vulnerability practiced, rewarded, and respected. What leaders model, teams mirror. Many leaders believe their job is to project confidence at all times. They feel pressure to have every answer, to appear unshakable, and to hide uncertainty. But this version of leadership creates distance. When leaders perform perfection, they silently tell their teams, there is no room for mistakes here. And when there's no room for mistakes, there's no room for learning. Courageous leadership looks different. It begins with the willingness to be seen as human. I don't know yet. They normalize learning. When they admit, I got this wrong, they model accountability without shame. When they ask, what am I missing? They invite collaboration instead of control. These moments don't weaken authority, they deepen trust. Vulnerability from leaders creates permission. It tells the team that honesty is valued more than image and growth is valued more than ego. People feel safer taking risks when they know mistakes won't be met with punishment or humiliation. Over time, this permission turns into engagement. People bring their full intelligence, creativity, and perspective to the work. One of the most powerful things a leader can model is how to receive feedback. Defensive leaders shut conversations down. Courageous leaders lean in. They listen without interrupting. They ask clarifying questions. They thank people for their honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. This response sends a clear message: your voice matters here. Modeling vulnerability also means acknowledging emotions at work. Pretending feelings don't exist doesn't make them disappear, it just drives them underground. Leaders who can name tension, uncertainty, or disappointment create clarity instead of confusion. They help teams move through emotions rather than getting stuck in them. Importantly, modeling vulnerability does not mean abandoning competence or boundaries. Courageous leaders remain decisive and accountable. They set clear expectations and hold people responsible. The difference is how they do it, with transparency, humility, and respect. Vulnerability and strength are not opposites, they are partners. When leaders lead this way consistently, something powerful happens. Teams stop waiting for permission to speak. They take ownership. They support each other. The culture shifts from fear-based compliance to values-based commitment, because leadership is not about being the strongest person in the room. It's about creating a room where everyone feels strong enough to show up. And that strength begins with the courage to lead openly. Shame is the silent killer of team culture. Shame rarely announces itself in teams. It doesn't walk into meetings and introduce its name. Instead, it hides behind sarcasm, silence, blame, and perfectionism. It shows up in unspoken rules like don't mess up, don't ask for help, and don't let them see you struggle. And while it often goes unnoticed, shame slowly erodes trust, creativity, and connection from the inside out. At its core, shame is the fear of being seen as flawed or unworthy. In team environments, this fear creates self-protection rather than collaboration. People become more concerned with avoiding embarrassment than contributing meaningfully. They stop taking risks. They stop speaking honestly. They start playing it safe, and safety, in this sense, is not growth. It's stagnation. Shame thrives in secrecy and silence. When mistakes are met with ridicule, blame, or punishment, people learn to hide. Errors are covered up instead of corrected. Feedback is avoided instead of welcomed. Over time, the team becomes reactive rather than proactive. Problems grow quietly until they become crises, all because no one felt safe enough to speak sooner. One of the most damaging aspects of shame-based cultures is how they confuse accountability with humiliation. Accountability says, this behavior needs to change. Shame says, you are the problem. When people feel shamed, they shut down or push back. When they feel accountable, they lean in and grow. Vulnerable teams understand this difference and practice accountability without attacking a person's worth. Language plays a powerful role here. Small comments, eye rolls, dismissive tones, public criticism send strong messages about what is safe and what is not. Over time, these micro moments shape behavior. People learn when to stay quiet, when to withhold ideas, and when to disengage emotionally. The cost is not just morale, it's performance. Vulnerable teams actively work to replace shame with curiosity and empathy. Instead of asking, who's at fault? They ask, what can we learn? Instead of reacting with anger, they respond with questions. This shift doesn't remove responsibility, it redirects it toward improvement. It transforms mistakes into opportunities rather than threats. Leaders have a unique responsibility in addressing shame. When leaders call out behavior without attacking character, they model respect. When they respond to failure with calm curiosity instead of emotional reactivity, they disrupt the shame cycle. And when they openly acknowledge their own mistakes, they remove the illusion that worth is tied to perfection. When shame loses its power, something remarkable happens. People show up with more confidence, not because they are flawless, but because they know they are valued. Creativity increases. Trust deepens. Collaboration strengthens. Because culture doesn't break in loud moments, it breaks in quiet ones. And shame is the quiet force that vulnerable teams choose to confront, name, and replace with courage. Honest conversations prevent future conflict. Most teams don't avoid hard conversations because they don't care. They avoid them because they care deeply. They worry about hurting feelings, creating tension, or damaging relationships. But here's the truth: what we don't talk about doesn't disappear. It accumulates, and over time, avoidance turns small issues into deep fractures. When teams lack vulnerability, silence becomes the default response to discomfort. Frustrations are shared inside conversations instead of direct ones. Assumptions replace clarity. Resentment quietly builds beneath polite interactions. On the surface, everything looks calm, but underneath, trust is slowly eroding. Honest conversations are an act of courage and respect. They say, when this relationship matters enough to address what's uncomfortable. Vulnerable teams understand that clarity is kinder than ambiguity. Addressing issues early prevents misunderstandings from turning into personal conflicts. Avoidance often feels like self-protection, but it actually creates more risk. When expectations aren't clearly communicated, people fill in the gaps with their own interpretations, and those interpretations are rarely generous. A missed deadline becomes a personal slight when a brief email is read as disrespect. Over time, stories replace facts and conflict becomes emotional rather than practical. Vulnerable teams interrupt this pattern by choosing direct, compassionate communication. They name issues without assigning blame. They focus on behaviors and outcomes, not character. This approach creates space for problem solving instead of defensiveness. When people feel respected, they are more open to feedback and change. Honest conversations also strengthen trust. When someone knows they will hear the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, they don't have to guess where they stand. Predictability creates safety, and safety allows people to focus on their work instead of managing uncertainty. These conversations are not about winning or being right, they are about alignment. Vulnerable teams ask questions like, what's getting in the way? And how can we do this better together? This shifts the tone from confrontation to collaboration. Conflict becomes a shared challenge rather than a personal battle. Leaders play a critical role in setting the tone for honest dialogue. When leaders avoid difficult conversations, they teach the team that discomfort should be sidestepped. When leaders engage directly with empathy and clarity, they normalize courage. They show that hard conversations can be handled with respect and care. Importantly, honest conversations require boundaries. Being vulnerable does not mean being careless with words. It means being thoughtful, timely, and grounded in shared goals. The intention is not to unload emotions, but to move the work and the relationship forward. When teams commit to honest conversations, something powerful happens, trust deepens, misunderstandings decrease, and emotional energy is freed up for creativity and collaboration, because conflict avoided today becomes crisis tomorrow. And vulnerable teams choose courage now so they don't pay the cost later. Vulnerability builds resilience in times of crisis. Every team will face moments of uncertainty, pressure, and disruption. Deadlines tighten, resources shrink, mistakes happen, and unexpected challenges appear. In these moments, the difference between teams that fracture and teams that endure is not talent or strategy, it is connection. Vulnerability is what strengthens that connection long before a crisis arrives. Resilient teams are not the ones that avoid difficulty. They are the ones that can move through it together. Vulnerability creates the trust that allows people to ask for help without fear, admit when they are overwhelmed, and share concerns early. In times of stress, this openness becomes a lifeline rather than a liability. In teams where vulnerability is absent, crises amplify fear. People retreat into self-preservation. Blame replaces collaboration. Communication becomes guarded or aggressive. Energy is spent on protecting reputations instead of solving problems. Even highly skilled teams can collapse under pressure when trust is missing. Vulnerable teams respond differently because they have already practiced honesty in calmer moments. They don't shut down when things get hard. They speak up sooner. They share information openly. They acknowledge emotions without letting them take control. This transparency allows the team to see the full picture and make better decisions faster. One of the most powerful aspects of vulnerability in crisis is the ability to normalize struggle. When leaders and team members can say, This is hard. It reduces isolation. People stop believing they are the only ones struggling, that shared reality creates solidarity, and solidarity fuels resilience. Vulnerability also encourages adaptability. Teams that are comfortable admitting what isn't working can pivot quickly. They don't cling to failing plans out of pride. They adjust, experiment, and learn in real time. This flexibility is critical in high-pressure situations where rigid thinking can be costly. Leaders play a crucial role during crises by modeling calm transparency. When leaders communicate openly about challenges without panic or false optimism, they build credibility. When they ask for input and listen genuinely, they tap into the collective intelligence of the team. People feel trusted, and trusted people rise to the moment. Importantly, vulnerability does not mean emotional chaos. It means regulated honesty. Resilient teams can acknowledge fear, frustration, or uncertainty while staying grounded in purpose and values. They don't suppress emotions, but they also don't let emotions derail action. After the crisis passes, vulnerable teams reflect together. They talk openly about what worked, what didn't, and what they learned. This reflection strengthens future resilience. Each challenge becomes a source of wisdom rather than trauma. Resilience is not about being unbreakable. It's about being connected enough to bend, adapt, and recover. Vulnerable teams don't just survive adversity, they emerge stronger, more trusting, and more aligned. And in a world that guarantees uncertainty, that may be the greatest strength of all. When you conclusion vulnerable teams are strong teams, as we come to the end of this conversation, let's return to the belief many of us were taught that strength at work means having all the answers, hiding uncertainty, and pushing through without support. Today, we've challenged that belief. True strength is not about armor, it's about connection. Vulnerable teams are strong not because they avoid fear or failure, but because they face both together. When trust replaces self-protection, people stop performing and start participating, and that shift changes everything. We explored how vulnerability lays the foundation of trust, creating an environment where people feel safe to be honest, ask for help, and admit mistakes. We saw how psychological safety unlocks real performance by allowing curiosity, innovation, and learning to thrive. We discussed the power of courageous leadership that models openness, accountability, and humility, and how culture is shaped not by what leaders say, but by what they consistently do. We also named the quiet damage caused by shame and how it silently kills creativity and connection. By replacing blame with curiosity and accountability with compassion, teams can break the cycle of fear that holds them back. We talked about the importance of honest conversations, how addressing discomfort early prevents resentment later, and how clarity is an act of respect. And finally, we looked at resilience, discovering that vulnerability is what allows teams to bend without breaking, adapt without collapsing, and recover with strength when challenges arise. This is not easy work. Choosing vulnerability requires courage. It asks us to let go of perfection, control, and certainty, and to trust something deeper, our shared humanity. But the reward is powerful. Teams become more engaged, more creative, and more aligned. Work becomes not just a place of productivity, but a place of belonging. And when people feel they belong, they bring their best selves forward. So as you return to your teams, your meetings, and your leadership roles, I invite you to start small. Ask one honest question, admit one uncertainty, create one moment of safety. Because vulnerability doesn't change culture overnight, it changes culture one brave moment at a time. And those moments add up. Thank you for showing up with an open mind and an open heart. Thank you for choosing courage over comfort. Goodbye, and may you build teams strong enough to be human.